So this is our medical corps, the 4th US Medical Corps, and this is Malcolm. So Malcolm, tell us a little bit about, what you're doing here and your display and everything.
Sure. Me with my senior nurse.
Or as I know her as the magic sponge lady.
That's
yes, indeed. Thank you.
Basically, we've just got a small display here of a capital kit, which would be issued to a surgeon or an assistant surgeon when they were commissioned into the army, and this would take them through their military career. One of the things about it is, if anything went missing, the surgeon had to pay for it when they returned it at the end of their service, unless they had a letter from a senior officer saying that it was lost under enemy fire. So, and bear in mind that these can be quite expensive at this time. But everything you see before you has a modern equivalent in a modern operating theatre. The only difference tends to be what they're made of, and these were reused time and time again, whereas today it's used once, throw away in the main, and anything that is reused tends to be taken fully apart and subjected to all sorts of cleaning procedures before it's reused. We do have a selection of reproduction manuals from the time, and they're for surgery, but they're also for recruitment and other things that the army is involved in. And I'll just show you one of them. This is actually how you're supposed to do camp and field duty. Unfortunately, that was written when the army was 15,000 strong, spread out over the entire continental United States, and it was quite easy to have 200 or 300 men somewhere and keep the water clean, the latrines where they were supposed to be, and the camp neatly set up. But of course, by this time, we were talking with hundreds of thousands of troops all over the place, quite often in an area they're not familiar with. And so a lot of those rules were observed more in their omission rather than actually being observed, carried on with. Now, as I say, that's the capital kit, so that's the surgery side, and I have to say that the vast majority of surgeries on both sides were very good. Very quickly, anyone who was a charlatan, and there were some at the beginning, were quickly found out, and if the commanding officer didn't get rid of them, the men made sure they were got rid of, because the men have to have confidence in their surgeon. Now, those little bottles you see in front of you there, they're a combination of commonly used items that were in the medical chest, which is what the surgeon was supposed to have with him for field service. One of the things that he would have had are the yellow pills, which are quinine. Yeah, you can lift it up. The quinine is used for the treatment of malaria. When the Union Army went into an area which was known to be prone to malaria, the troops were issued with a quinine pill. The unfortunate thing is because they're very bitter, they didn't take them. So, to get round this, there was a bugle call created called the quinine call, and each regiment would be lined up every day, and each soldier would be given their quinine pill, and they would have to prove to their commanding officer or their captain or the surgeon, depending on who was doing the issuing, that they had not only put the pill into their mouth, but they'd also swallowed it. because all these little yellow pills kept appearing around the camp, which is why they knew they weren't being taken. But because they were using it as what's called a prophylactic, it meant that the incidence of malaria in the Union armies that were enforcing the quinine taking were greatly reduced. They had loads of other fevers which all looked the same, but the ones specifically related to malaria were very quickly controlled. Unfortunately for the Confederates, they only gave them out when they thought somebody had malaria. So simply because of the blockade, they didn't have to. Now there's another brightly coloured pill, the blue one, which is called Blue Mass, and this one, unlike the quinine, although it did work, it had an unfortunate side effect of also giving the patient mercury poisoning, because it's a combination of mercury and chalk and a few other things, and it was actually designed to stop the soldier having gastric distress. I think that's how we better do it, because you don't know who's going to be watching this. But it had a counterpart called white mass, which was actually a slightly different combination, but did include mercury, and that was what was known as a starter. So you had starters, which was the white mass, stoppers, which was the blue mass. And there was one Georgian surgeon, and he would go down the line of men as he was passing, and he would say to each soldier, starter or stopper? Starter, sir. So he put his pocket where he had a big lump of white mass, and he'd give it to them, stopper, sir, and then he'd go into the other pocket where he had a big lump of blue mass, twist off a bit and gave it to the soldier, and he would go down there dispensing starters and stoppers as the men required. So, but as with all these things, again, blue mass and white mass have been around for a long time. Because it seemed to work most of the time, they stuck with it, because there are a couple of other medicines there. One's called calomel, and the other one, which is, I think, if I remember rightly, that one. And there's another one called Dover's powder, which is that one. Okay. And they again are centuries old recipes. Both contain mercury, but at least one of them's also got opium in it, which would have done something for the pain control. And basically the reasoning on it was, if you got better, then the powder worked, and if you died, well, you were going to die anyway. So, and because, and like I say, they are centuries old remedies, although the Union Army did try to get calomel out once, and through shenanigans at the War Department, it got reinstated, and a few months after the Surgeon General was thrown out on false charges, it quietly disappeared out of the stock cupboard, as it were. The other thing is, of course, there are a lot of herbal-based remedies which Lesley was quite fond of. So would you like to give an indication?
Yes, it was an interesting period because it was a transition between the traditional herbal medicine and the so-called scientific medicine. And as my colleague has explained, the scientific medicine were using things like mercury, heavy metals, iron, and so on, and they were adding them to the traditional medicines. And you can see that even nowadays within something like white willow, which has actually got one of its ingredients is salicylic acid, which we know as aspirin. And so when taken as a complete herb, it's actually very good for the digestion as well as for pain control, because it has things in it called quenchers. But with the aspirin, with the extraction of the active ingredient, it removes that natural protection for the gut. And you see that happening a lot with the different types of extractions and the different types of use and development of medication and drugs, and you see that even today. But a lot of the herbs are still used. We use them all the time. We use them every day without realising it when we add herbs to our food. You know, rosemary and thyme and lemon and cinnamon and so on. We add a lot of things which are actually medicinal. So very important to understand that balance between the traditional medicines and the more developing medicines at this time. The nurse was also responsible for a whole range of other things. Nurses at this time were very unusual. It was the first time that women were actually employed as nurses by an army, and so they had a minimum training. They were mainly represented in hospitals and so on, but you do see females either attached to a regiment or attached to individuals within regiments who would go and support the regiment or the army in helping to do the basic things of life, helping to wash patients and to feed them properly. There's a lovely little nursing book which has got mainly recipes in it and basic first aid. And also, as you can see here, I've got a letter writing kit. And so I've got pens, I've got paper, I've got ink, I've even got a little thing there for putting my name on it and a wipe. Because soldiers want letters written for them. They want their families to know that they are actually still alive, because messages go back and forth in the most unexpected ways. And the only way was by post, really, or by personal contact. There were no such things as telecommunications that were for people. So letters were very, very important at this time, and writing letters home was very good.
And again, some of them would have been illiterate.
Many were illiterate, yes. Or they may have got injuries which have affected their limbs so that they couldn't write properly, or they didn't have the equipment to write. You know, they didn't have the pens and paper. So yes, and this was a way of sending a story back home. And that was the nurse's job, and many of them were there to read to patients and just chat to them, be social, the same as we do now. You know, we have volunteers in hospitals who go and just chat to people and make them feel individuals, loved and wanted. But also having to support the medical service, which was quite, in many ways, quite difficult initially, because nursing was a new profession. It had been primarily done by people casually, not officially. And so nurses were recruited. Initially in the northern side, when they were first recruited, they had to be over 30, single, and of plain appearance. So,
yeah.
Not to be chasing after the soldiers as for husbands and so on. But of course that quickly changed as people, and there were quite a few people, famous people, who became who did some nursing during during this period, during the Civil War, and Louisa M. Alcott was one of them, and she wrote about it afterwards, about her experiences. And you do find many of the stories that the women tell are very revealing about how things really were, and how the relationships were, and how the soldiers managed with their injuries, and how they were treated. So a very interesting period for women's development in the nursing profession, and also for pharmaceuticals.
Because going on the nursing side, the ones that quite often most people know about, people like Clara Barton, and then there was another one called Mother Bickerdike, and Grant said of her, when he was asked about Mother Bickerdike, his simple response was, "She ranks me." In other words, however senior I am, she's at least one grade above, and I just do what she tells me, basically. And there were quite a few women who did nurse, because everyone thinks nurses weren't on on or near the field of battle, but certainly Clara Barton at Gettysburg, she was in one of the chapels, I think it was. She was tending down to a patient who was on the floor, sat up against the wall, and as she leant down, as you read it, you know, women tended to have puffy sleeves, and the bullet went through the sleeve and into the head of the patient she was just about to treat. So she had an extremely close call on that. And the other thing, of course, is with the religious orders, because even the teaching orders, or the non-nursing orders, within their house rules, things about how you keep things clean, what sort of meals you should eat. And again, there's a very famous picture which actually shows a military train appearing at a battle scene, and it's loaded with ammunition, and there is this detachment. Was it Sisters of Mercy?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, the ones that you see with sort of big wimples and headdresses, and they're piling off this train to go and treat the wounded at the battlefront.
They were used a lot in the Navy as well, and one of the reasons I think that they were liked was because, apart from the fact they knew what they were doing, particularly with the nursing orders, because they were experienced, they were also very good at taking orders. They would know how to be disciplined, and they knew that and the soldiers knew who they were and what they did, and so there was a mutual respect and a mutual understanding, as well as the ability to do the job efficiently and effectively. Yeah, nursing was brilliant.
And of course, as with all wars, there are two things humanity manages to improve. One is the bad one, which is how to kill, maim, injure and generally disfigure the human body. And the other one, which is to the good, is the medicine, and especially the trauma surgery improves greatly. And certainly at this time, the results of and the reports from the Crimea were starting to come through, and Florence Nightingale's design of hospital wards greatly influenced the hospitals that were built during the war by both sides. If you look at somewhere like Chimborazo, which was in the south, and it was 8,000 beds, every single ward there was built on the Nightingale principle. So it was light, it was airy, there was space, everyone was in a clean bed, they had a clean nightshirt, they were washed regularly, their clothing was washed, the sheets were washed, and again, the laundry. A lot of women were employed as laundresses, just to look after the bedding and the nightshirts and so on. So it's very much this war, and as I say, the Crimea, you really have to take them together, because you've got railways being used extensively, telegraphs being used extensively, ships being used extensively, both on the rivers and along the coast, both for blockade purposes, but also for transporting the sick and wounded. You know, many troops were taken up the Mississippi on either side wheelers or stern wheelers to the general hospitals that were in the north.
And some ships were used as hospitals, weren't they?
Yeah,
so that you got easy access to the to treatment, because you were near the sea or you were near a river, a big river or something like that. And some of the techniques, some of the surgical techniques that were developed were still being used in the First World War. So there were a lot of developments. The development of things like use of chloroform, the use of ether, the refinement of how they were titrated. These were all things that developed within, and when you think of it, it's only 5 years. And the number of hospitals that were built, over 200 hospitals in the north, built in 5 years. How do you do that? And many of them are still functioning. So the style, the design, and the way they serve the population as well was very important at the time, and has improved the state of the nation in many ways.
Okay.
And as I say, with these hospital ships especially, that's where you would also find a lot of female nurses, because that's where they were employed.
The nuns were very much into the naval side of things. Again, because it was more stable in many respects than the army, because you had a ship and you had the community of the ship. So they were part of that, and it was a very well integrated service.
Yeah, so hopefully that's
That was
you an
absolutely
idea.
brilliant, guys. Honestly, absolutely brilliant. So anyway, thank you guys, and
Thank you.
hopefully we can speak again soon.
Thank you.
Much obliged.